communications with the public relations people, evidence of any collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. But there's all kinds of evidence showing links between the Clinton campaign and the dossier, and maybe the dossier, became the catalyst for the surveillance and stuff done in the Trump campaign. Think about that.
Had 3 passports with 3 different numbers. He applied for 10 passports.
And you know what?
10 different U.S. passports. Hold on, Congressman. Over the course of 10 years, he was the Trump campaign chairman. One person who was a foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign has pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI about his relationships and associations with Russians. Why don't those get your attention?
Well, they got everyone's attention. They've obviously got your attention. I will again. I'll point out, if Mr. Manafort did something wrong, then he'll be prosecuted for that, and he'll have to serve the sentence. I understand that. Same with Mr. Gates. That's fine.
The nexus between Manafort and the Trump campaign is what we're talking about. The Trump campaign hired him as their campaign chairman. I mean, talking about extreme vetting, it sounds like the president believes in extreme vetting for everybody except his own staff.
And then he got rid of him a few months later, and there's been an indictment going back to 2005 through 2015. None of that was during the time when he was involved with the Trump campaign.
And a guilty plea.
And it all deals with tax evasion and not filling out forms properly and not giving information to the federal government. And he should be held accountable for that if, in fact, he committed some wrongdoing, which it looks like he may have. So that's all fine, and let's do that. But tell me where the link is with Russia.
Okay,
there is none. There is none. But we do know Hillary Clinton's campaign paid Fusion GPS to produce this dossier, and it looks like this dossier became the catalyst for surveillance and wiretapping.
We have so much breaking news. We also know that the Trump campaign kept setting up meetings and trying to get dirt from Kremlin-backed Russian operatives on Hillary Clinton. I mean, you seem to just be omitting that part, which is always head-scratching. But listen, we have so much breaking news, we have to leave it there. Congressman, thank you very much for being on with us this morning. We are following a lot of breaking news, including all the details about the terror attack in New York City. Let's get right to it.
This is CNN Breaking News.
All right, here we are at the site in Lower Manhattan, New York City, where we have now had the deadliest terror attack since 9/11. 8 people lost their lives. A dozen have been injured, maybe more. Authorities are saying some may have self-evacuated after coming into contact with this murderous, now presumed terrorist, who used just a pickup truck, hopped a curb, and went about a mile, taking people out along the way. It didn't end until he hit a school bus in front of a high school that's just behind us. Now, this act would be terrible no matter where it happened, but there is a significance additional to it because of where we are. This is the World Trade Center. We are literally in its shadow. This is a place that is a symbol of the resolve to fight terror, to not be hardened by it. And yet, here we are once again, despite all the law enforcement. But there is no information. This man is being somewhat cooperative with police. They were able to take him into custody. He was shot in the abdomen by a police officer from the 1st Precinct after running away from the vehicle when he hit that school bus. They are also all over his home in Paterson, New Jersey. We have live pictures of that as well. And they have been found, we are told, information that is ISIS-related on his computers. And again, he left a note saying that this was ISIS-inspired, and he said Allahu Akbar is the report when he exited the vehicle. For more on what happened here, the worst kind of history to make in the terror category, we have Jean Casares with the latest. Jean.
Chris, the hustle and bustle of New York City has begun this morning. People on their way to work with the realization that this was the worst
Casares with the latest. Jean.
Chris, the hustle and bustle of New York City has begun this morning. People on their way to work with the realization that this was the worst terror attack since 9/11. We are so close to the Trade Center, the World Trade Center. 19 people were victims in this attack, 11 injured, and 8 lost their lives.
We got multiple casualties. This is a mass casualty situation here.
Terrifying moments in downtown Manhattan.
Any traffic shut down from 14th Street on the West Side Highway at this time. It's going to be a crime scene.
A pickup truck barreling down a busy bike and footpath for nearly a mile. The suspect, 29-year-old Sayfullo Saipov, was shot in the stomach and remains hospitalized. A law enforcement source says a note was found near the truck saying the attack was done in the name of ISIS.
There's no evidence to suggest a wider plot or a wider scheme. We will be vigilant.
Saipov, a native of Uzbekistan, came to the United States in 2010. In 2013, he married a young woman also from Uzbekistan in Ohio. The occupation listed on his marriage license, truck driver. Law enforcement sources tell CNN Saipov is connected to a residence in Tampa, Florida, but most recently lived in Paterson, New Jersey. Uber confirms to CNN that Saipov worked for them for the past 6 months and passed their background check. The company says they are cooperating with authorities. Saipov was arrested in Missouri in 2016 after failing to appear in court for a traffic violation. Police say Saipov rented the pickup truck from this Home Depot store in New Jersey just before carrying out the attack. At 3:05 p.m., the truck entered the bike path, driving south along New York City's riverfront on the west side of Lower Manhattan, plowing into cyclists and pedestrians for nearly a mile. Bodies and mangled bikes strewn across the path.
I see two gentlemen laying right there in the bike lane with tire marks across their body, and you could tell that they're not here no more.
The truck eventually coming to a halt after crashing into a school bus outside Stuyvesant High School. The attacker caught on camera running from the truck, brandishing what appeared to be two guns.
He was dragging his foot a little bit, and he was screaming in the street. He looked frustrated, panicked, confused.
Police later discovering that Saipov was holding a pellet and paintball gun. The suspect was shot by a 28-year-old NYPD officer, Ryan Nash. One World Trade Center and Empire State Building lighting up in red, white, and blue Tuesday night. Despite the attack, the city's Halloween parade going on as planned with tighter security.
New Yorkers are strong, New Yorkers are resilient, and our spirit will never be moved by an act of violence, an act meant to intimidate us.
We are beginning to learn a bit more about the victims that lost their lives. 5 of them were citizens of Argentina. They were here together celebrating their 30th high school reunion. Another victim that we know of at this point was a Belgian national. Allison?
Jean, that is so tragic, thinking about them celebrating and now not being able to go home. Thank you very much for the reporting from the scene there. Joining me now is New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. Good morning, Governor.
Good morning, Allison.
So we understand that this suspect who survived is now speaking to cops. Do you have any sense of his background or better sense of his connections?
We have, much as you just reported, he is, all the evidence we have is that he was quote-unquote lone wolf model. You know, there's an evolution of tactics for the jihads, right? It's no longer about training camps in a geographic area. They now have a global platform with the internet, and you can download material. And they have a very simple template: rent a car, rent a truck, create mayhem. He has had several run-ins with the law, which were basically minor vehicular traffic. New York State Police actually, ironically, once helped him and his truck out of a ditch. But look, he is a depraved coward, is what he is. And he was associated with ISIS, and he was radicalized domestically. And he's a depraved coward. And they tried to create terror. It's not the first time. It's a global phenomenon now. It's all through Europe, etc. It happened to New York first in 1993, World Trade Center bombing. My father was governor. Yeah. 6 people died. Then obviously 9/11. And we expect it to continue.
And Governor, when you say that he was radicalized,
can't let it beat you.
Domestically, what does that mean? What do you know about that?
Well, the evidence shows, and again, it's only several hours and the investigation is ongoing, but that after he came to the United States is when he started to become informed about ISIS and radical Islamic tactics. We have no evidence yet of associations or a continuing plot or associated plots. And our only evidence to date is that this was an isolated incident that he himself performed. And again, ISIS has gotten it down to a simple formula that they can put on the internet.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to rent a car, rent a truck. But they are cowards, and they are depraved. And I resist the temptation to delve into who they were and why, and we know why. They hate America, and New York is a target, let's be honest. We have the Statue of Liberty in our harbor holding the torch that says freedom and democracy. It's repugnant to them. And that was the World Trade Center bombing. That was 9/11. I was there for that. That was the hardest blow this nation has taken with the associated attacks.
Yeah.
And they failed. They have a 100% failure rate. New York got up. We got up stronger. We got up bigger. We got up better. And that's what yesterday was also. It was a failed attempt. Yes, we lost 8 lives, and we cry and we pray. But last night we had our Halloween parade.
Yeah.
And I marched, Allison, not because I had a great costume, but because my point was, we're here, we're going on, we're celebrating, kids are going back to school today, the terrorists fail once again.
Listen, Governor, it's so striking, okay? It is so striking that the Halloween parade with children coming out and parents went on hours after this terror attack. And so how do you explain that? Is this New York's new normal? Is this the country's new normal? Are New Yorkers somehow either hardened to this or taking this in stride?
Well, hardened. 1993 was the first incident. It's been 25 years. If you live in this world, Allison, it's almost every couple of weeks there's an incident somewhere, right? But it's not hardened. I think we have hardened society from a policing point of view, protection, etc. I think it's defiance. I said all yesterday afternoon, I'll see you at the parade, I'll see you at the parade, I'll see you at the parade. You can't let them win. The only way forward is to defeat them. Now, can you defeat every depraved coward who wants to rent a car and drive into a crowd? No. We prevent dozens for every one that happens through intelligence and policing. But it will happen. Don't let them win. They're called terrorists. They want to impart terror. They didn't. They killed 8 innocent people in a very cowardly way with a truck hitting bicyclists and pedestrians from behind. That is the definition of coward. But you did not impart terror. A great parade last night. As soon as people got the information, in the middle of the afternoon, people were anxious because they didn't have information. But once they had the information, I encouraged people to come to the parade, join me at the parade, and you're right, it was remarkable. Children, costumes, you would not have known going down that parade that anything happened in the afternoon.
So, Governor, listen.
That is victory for New York.
Agreed. But listen, this weekend is the New York Marathon, okay? 50,000 runners, people lining the streets for 26 miles. That is, well, look, we know what happened in the Boston Marathon. So about these soft targets, you know, a bike path is a soft target. these 26 miles of people lining the streets, what can you do to fortify those soft targets?
You can do everything you can do, Allison. I've spoken to the Secretary of the Homeland Security. We have federal forces. We're coordinated with the FBI. We have state police. We have National Guard. We have the New York Police Department, which is one of the finest police departments in the country. We're coordinating with the mayor. We're coordinating with everyone. And you do everything you can. Now, the implication of your question is you can't make the entire route safe. You're right. You are right. You cannot have concrete barriers in front of every possible location. You're right. You do everything you can. You have the best police force you can. But when and if an incident happens, you make sure it's not successful. Success for them was not killing 8 people. Success was the attempt to instill terror, and they failed. They have a 100% failure rate. They're depraved cowards who fail. They failed yesterday, and they'll fail every time they do it. And the best attack they had, 9/11, we got up bigger, better, stronger than ever before. You didn't instill terror. You made New York stronger at the end of the day. That is the only way to do this.
Yeah.
It's the only way to ultimately win is to frustrate their objective.
Yeah.
And that's what we've done. We did it brilliantly yesterday, and that's going to be the New York tradition going forward.
Governor Andrew Cuomo, we really appreciate talking to you on that note. Thanks so much for being with us.
I like talking to you, Allison.
I hear you loud and clear, and I will relate that to my co-anchor. Thank you. So the terror suspect is talking to investigators this morning. What's he saying? What have they learned from him?
All right, we have new information into the investigation. For that, let's get to Shimon Prokupecz. He's our reporter and producer. You've got the latest. What do we know?
Yeah, that's right, Chris. So overnight, we've been told that investigators, the FBI and the NYPD, have been with the suspect. He was intubated at some point, and after that, he was talking, somewhat cooperative. The sources are saying, they basically are saying he wasn't uncooperative. So it's not exactly clear what information he's providing, but whatever it is, they have so far found it useful. We're also told that that authorities have been able to link social media accounts to the suspect. These accounts weren't necessarily in his name, but through their investigative means and through searches, they have been able to link these accounts to him. And what they have found are ISIS-related materials on these accounts, and so they're sorting through them. And the key now, Chris, is to find out when he was radicalized. You know, as the governor just said a short time ago, they believe that he was radicalized while in the U.S., and now the question is when. And because it goes to theory, to motive, how quickly did he become radicalized is because they want to know when did he decide to launch this attack. There appears, according to sources I've talked to, there's some evidence that he may have been planning this for some time, but they're still working through that. And finally, they're really working to make sure that he's not connected to anyone else.
Yeah, that's an important distinction there that they're still looking into, right, Shimon, about whether or not he radicalized himself, you know, as an aspirant, as they're saying, or whether he was inspired by somebody else while here in the United States. So you're tracking that down for us. Appreciate it. All right, so let's bring in the panel. There's a lot to process here. We have Asha Rangappa, former FBI, now professor at Yale, and we have CNN law enforcement analysts Joe Giacalone and James Galliano, professor at St. John's University, professor at John Jay. All right, so Asha, let's start with what you've heard so far in terms of the architecture of the investigation and what they need to know still. Where are we?
Well, we're still in the beginning stages. The fact that the attacker is likely to survive will be helpful in getting the kind of information to determine what kind of attack this was. Was this a part of, some kind of network, or was it a lone wolf? And that's going to make a difference, because it'll make a difference in terms of how to analyze this kind of attack. And if it is a lone wolf, right now what's coming out is that there's no evidence that this was connected to a broader plot, that he was self-radicalized, as we just heard, in which case it's part of a trend where it's going to be incredibly difficult to prevent these kinds of independent lone wolf attacks on soft targets like this sidewalk crash.
Right. So, James, let's bounce the idea, though, of not just a random madman, right? Because he had to know where to jump that curb. You know, for people who aren't from New York City, it's not a completely soft target. You can't just drive onto that bike path wherever you want, but you can where he did it.
Sure, and we know he probably had to case it out, and to do this prior to the attack. Every square inch in New York City, Chris, just about is covered by cameras. So to the point we spoke about before, there's two types of intelligence we're going to be harvesting right now. Asha spoke about the human intelligence, interviewing him after he came out of surgery. That's critical. The other piece is SIGINT, signal intelligence, and that's going to be the Easy Pass that was used. That's going to be the cameras. That's going to be trying to piece together all these pieces so that you take what we know from the human intelligence, the signal intelligence, put it together and paint a better picture. There are going to be some changes on the West Side Highway, I think.
All right, so let's talk about that. Joe, you're going to have your students, a lot of them will wind up being in law enforcement if they're not already. They're going to say, we can't stop this. This is a guy who rents a truck and just drives into a place. And here where we are, I mean, look, it's always worth it. Remind people where we are. We're in the shadow of the World Trade Center here. You got the Joint Terrorism on Task Force, you know, on one side. You've got police headquarters on the other. You've got cop presence all over this place all the time. He still was able to do it. You can't stop it.
Right. Well, we want to be positive, right? We don't want to ever say that, it's a lost cause, so we're just going to forget about it. So we still want to come up with new and inventive ways in order to use physical barriers to try to stop some of these things. Maybe we find a couple of loopholes now and a couple of things where, you know what, maybe we need to change this around a little bit. We saw it in Times Square, right? After that, the guy was drunk who drove into the crowd. So, and then they changed everything then too. So it's unfortunate that this event has occurred, but I think it will actually help with physical security going forward.
But it also gives you a part of the reality. Why do I say it that way, Jimmy? The reason I say it that way is, look around us. Right. People live their life anyway. They don't think you're going to be able to stop things like this. What's changed in our time since 9/11, and again, it means something that it happened here. The symbolism is real. The pain returns quickly for people who were here that day, and the phone calls of what's going on the West Side. Right. I can't find so-and-so. My kid goes to that school. So-and-so's on that bike path every day. We remember what that was. That had to go into this guy's calculus. But they went to the parade last night, even though they don't think you can stop everybody with a truck. They're going to work this morning, even though they don't think you can stop everybody with a truck.
Chris, part of it is personal awareness. And we live now in the modern post-9/11 world, especially in New York and big cities. There's a thing called Cooper's Colors in law enforcement, which says that the average person walking around who's oblivious is in condition white. You can't. As you move forward, yellow, orange, red, and red is a really heightened sense of awareness. We have to move people from white into the yellow or orange just to be more aware. And as the FBI has been putting out now for the past couple of years, in preparation for things like this, if you have an active shooter or you have a terrorist attack, somebody with a vehicle like this, you always have to remember in this order: run is your first thing, hide if you can't run away, fight if you must, and the last thing, the most important, Chris, tell. Last night out here on set at location, a number of folks came up to us with cell phones, showed us pictures. We directed them to the cops and said, hey, make sure law enforcement has those. That's an important piece of the intel.
Asha, when you look at this situation, what are the points of interest for you?
The points of interest for me are how these attacks are relating to our broader counterterrorism strategy. Homegrown radicalization, which it looks like this is the case here, is the fastest growing threat in the United States. And by homegrown radicalization, these are people who are already here and deciding to affiliating themselves with some sort of ideology to carry these out. And right now we have under the Trump administration, we have a citizen-based travel ban. We're on a third iteration now. It does not include the country that this person was from. We also have, immigration policy that is targeting people who aren't the ones that are necessarily committing these crimes. And so I think there needs to be more study of how are these people coming here, becoming alienated, getting on social media, and finding that this is the way that they are going to fit in to, some sort of group because they're not fitting into American society.
Right.
So I think that, and I think the social media piece is very important here too.
Right. Look, I mean, the good news is this. You got to talk about this stuff in the moment, right? We made that mistake in Vegas. Right there, we got pushed back by the politics. Oh, you don't want to talk about the bump stock right now. We don't want to talk about mental health and how we deal with it right now. That's disrespectful to the victims. But we all know what that was about, all right? At least now they're talking about these things because the reaction, Joe, people hear about this. They say, it's the Muslims. This guy's a Muslim. They're out to get us. Now, that's demonstrably false. Of course you have a radical element, and it is Islamic. It's a bastardization of it. It's perverse. It's actually extreme Islamism. But the distinctions are lost on people. When they hear this, there's a reason that the president goes right to entry into the country. What do you do on that level of how you identify the threat and how you get the American people to perceive what the threat is?
Well, it's about really getting the guys on the ground, the guys and girls on the ground, right? This investigation, the social media aspect of it. But you know what? With all the information that we have out there, I mean, our public is generally misinformed about a lot of things, and people need to educate themselves about exactly what's going on. I mean, the YouTube videos, and all the other way they're getting radicalized. I mean, people have to identify these things, and if they have a family member who is, taking all this stuff in all the time, I mean, these are warning signs, and maybe they got to talk to them and stuff.
Well, you remember what happened after 9/11, Jimmy?
Absolutely.
We had people beating up Sikhs in Brooklyn. Sikhs who were not Muslims, by the way. It was happening because, you got to calibrate your response to what is the threat and what do you do about it.
Chris, a big part of it is, America is the melting pot, right? And as we've seen these type of attacks of recent in Belgium, in Germany, in London, the assimilation process there is not like it is in America. We do a lot better job here, I believe, in assimilation and outreach. The FBI and NYPD.
Yeah. Our politics are changing on this. This place is not putting its arms around people the way it used to, culturally and politically. It's changing. Is that the answer, though, what we're hearing? Lock down the borders, only get in merit-based, have your travel bans. Would that stop it?
Chris, you can look at the countries that are being proposed for this travel ban, and you can argue that. But you can also look at it from the perspective of, are they really going after the largest Muslim country? No. The largest Arabic country? No. We've got to be very, very careful
Indonesia,
with this.
no Saudi Arabia. Absolutely.
No Egypt. We've got to be careful because, as you pointed out before, it's the messaging. And sometimes I think the part of that process is the poor messaging that goes out where people look at that and say, well, you're targeting us. I mean, Uzbekistan is not on the travel ban list. And obviously, this guy was from Uzbekistan, came here in 2010. Big part of it, as we just said, it's assimilation. It's making sure that we don't allow, not that we don't allow them, but that we don't have established enclaves, that people feel comfortable enough to expand, to enjoy the freedoms we have here, and to assimilate themselves in American society.
Asha Rangappa, when you hear about this and the larger policy discussion that has to be going on right now, what are the points of emphasis? What are the things that need to change, if anything?
Well, I think you identified some of it. This is about, there is a broader characterization that we need to stop making into these stark terms that don't apply and get a little bit nuanced about how we're approaching it. I just want to go back to James's point, which is I think a great one about assimilation and how those social networks for people who are here are so important in understanding and addressing this issue. And it relates to social media. People spend about 6.5 hours online every day. That's a huge amount of time, and that creates an opening for this kind of remote radicalization that we see going on with ISIS and, in other areas too. We know even the Russians exploited that kind of focus that people have online to exploit division. So I think, moving people away from their computer screens and creating actual social connections can go a long way, particularly for people who are feeling alienated and isolated and starting to cling and find these ideologies attractive. And I think that's where we need to move to. I think mental health is also an issue. There is a pattern with lone wolf attackers that there is some mental health background, and that's also where family members who are the ones that are mostly in contact with them need to be able to identify this, because, these broader ways of addressing terrorism that we have, identifying networks and using our communications-based investigative techniques aren't going to work for someone who's sitting in their room and deciding to take this kind of action completely on their own.
Understood. Asha, James, Joe, thank you very much. Allison, quick moment of perspective. When 9/11 hit, I was here. We were doing reporting, but it was a personal hit for a lot of us as well. I got engaged, Christina and I got engaged 11 days after, because it was such a monumental thing. We figured the world would never be the same. It was time to live our lives. Yesterday when this happened and I had to run down, my kids were scared. They're always scared. We wind up running around in so many dangerous places. But their recognition and their perspective on this, and how they weren't devastated and panicked. How are they like, how many? Are they okay? This is terrible. And then it was still Halloween. And while they were thinking about it, they wanted to get on with their life as well. And man, it hit me, wow, how we've changed. How our recognition of what normal is so different than when it was just several years ago.
I totally agree, Chris. I mean, that's what the governor of New York just said, terrorists zero, New York wins. And that's because, we all have now somehow incorporated that the risk is real and we're going to live our lives anyway. And that's just such an important message. Thank you very much for reporting from down there. We'll check back with you soon, Chris. But meanwhile, President Trump is blaming Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer. The terror attack in Lower Manhattan is the deadliest attack in New York since 9/11. President Trump is blaming Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer for how the suspect was able to get into the U.S. in the first place. He's tweeted this morning, Senate Chuck Schumer helping to import Europe's problems, said Colonel Tony Shaffer. We will stop this craziness. That was about a segment, we believe, on Fox News this morning. Here is Chuck Schumer's response. I guess it's not too soon to politicize a tragedy. Well, there you have it. Joining us now is Democratic Congresswoman Jackie Speier of California. She's a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congresswoman, nice to see you. Sorry we have to talk about this terror attack. Is this Chuck Schumer's fault?
Uzbekistan has been one of the countries that has been a partner with us in the fight against terror. So for the president to come out lashing out again instead of trying to help the country heal and feel that we will somehow get this under control is really quite disturbing. Again, he has a difficult time leading.
Look, here's what he tweeted before those tweets that I just read. The terrorists came into our country through what is called the Diversity Visa Lottery Program, a Chuck Schumer beauty. I want merit-based. He's referring to this policy, that legislation that was proposed. I think Chuck Schumer sponsored it in 1990. It was bipartisan. It was bipartisan legislation, and it was signed by George H.W. Bush. But last night on Fox, Sean Hannity blamed it on Chuck Schumer, or Mark Levin, who's a right-wing radio host on Hannity's program, blamed it on Chuck Schumer. And so is this where the president gets his policy ideas?
Well, it sure sounds like it. He is a premier blame gamer, and that is not the kind of person we want leading our country. Everywhere I go now throughout the country, people say, can't you come together? Can't you work together? With a president who's constantly attacking both members of his own party and members of the other party, that is very difficult to achieve.
Senator Jeff Flake just tweeted about all of this. I'm reading it for the first time, and you're hearing it for the first time. Actually, the Gang of Eight, including Senator Schumer, did away with the diversity visa program as part of broader reforms. I know. I was there. I mean, listen, Jeff Flake, as you know, has begun speaking out pretty vociferously. What are you hearing in the halls of Congress, as opposed to whether or not more people, and not just Democrats, and not just Jeff Flake and John McCain, will speak out when they hear something that bothers them about something the president has said?
Well, I think that when the American people start to show that they don't have confidence in this president's leadership, and it's reflected in their willingness to support the Republican who may be representing them in Congress, you're going to see members shifting. There's a lot of members here on the Republican side who are very disturbed by the president's approach. But they are fearful for their reelection bids. And that, frankly, is what motivates a great number of them.
I want to talk about the other news that happened today, that happened this week, I should say, and that was Paul Manafort surrendering to the FBI and for all of these, it seems money laundering charges. And here is video of that from Monday. CNN has reporting this morning about just how deep this went with Paul Manafort and the things that he's accused of. He had 3 different passports with 3 different numbers. He had applied for 10 different U.S. passports over the course of the last 10 years. He traveled to Ecuador, China, and Mexico using a fake email and fake phone account with fake names. He had money accounts in the Seychelles, the Grenadines, and Cyprus. He was apparently had millions of dollars worth of stuff there. What do you make of why he was the Trump campaign chairman and whether or not they should have known about some of those things?
Well, clearly he wasn't vetted. It was basically on the recommendation of one of Donald Trump's good friends. Paul Manafort has a long reputation working on campaigns, on presidential campaigns. But the fact that he is an outlaw to the extent that has been disclosed so far is deeply concerning, I think, to all of us. And I'm beginning to wonder if he wasn't an agent of Russia.
What does that mean?
Pardon me?
What do you mean by that?
Well, there was such an interest in becoming chair and then such an interest in offering himself for free when he clearly had lots of financial troubles. And, Russia is really good at IDing people who they can manipulate, who might have financial troubles. And he has had a relationship in the Ukraine and that is, very close to Russia, obviously. And I wouldn't be surprised if we find out down the road that there's more to this than what meets the eye.
We just had Congressman Jim Jordan on who said, look, all of this Manafort stuff, ancient history. This is from 2005 through 2015, before he went to work for the campaign. What do you say to that?
Well, what I say to that is that's all part of one's history and one's reputation. And when we hire someone, we look at their record. We don't basically say, oh, well, that was yesterday. And I think that, it is what the Republicans are using right now. But let's remember that it was Papadopoulos who was working on the campaign, who has pled guilty, who has shown by email now that he was in constant contact with Russian interests and was trying to set up a meeting with the president and the higher-ups within the organization. So this whole issue of was there coordination by the Trump campaign with Russia is starting to have legs.
Congresswoman Jackie Speier, thank you very much for being on New Day. Great to talk to you.
Thank you, Allison.
Up next, terrorists using vehicles as deadly weapons. What can law enforcement do to prevent these kinds of attacks? We have a national security expert here next.
We're in downtown Manhattan. This is the site of the deadliest terror attack since 9/11 here in New York. 8 people lost their lives, 13 injured, and there may be more. Authorities say some may have self-evacuated after coming into contact with this madman, an alleged terrorist who just jumped the curb in a pickup truck he had rented just hours earlier and did so much destruction. He found a spot along this west side of Manhattan here, just a block or so from where we are right now, where he had a path for about a mile before he ran into a school bus. What planning, what inspiration, that's all part of the investigation. But there's some larger considerations. So for that, let's bring in Lisa Monaco, CNN National Security Advisor, worked with the Obama administration in national security, homeland security. Lisa, it's good to have you. On the macro level, the president is saying this is about you Democrats and a policy of admission to this country that is too permissive. The diversity visa that he says this man entered the country on, that's the problem. Lock down the border, keep people like this out, you'll be safe. Your response?
Well, good morning, Chris. Look, I think the first thing we should not do less than 24 hours after this carnage is politicize it. We should always be looking for ways to strengthen our vetting, to strengthen our borders, But we need to do so smartly, based on intelligence and based on facts. And we will see what this investigation uncovers about when this individual was radicalized. He's been here for several years, almost 10 years it looks like, based on the information we have now. And we know that the Department of Homeland Security released an intelligence assessment just a few months ago in March of this year, where they indicated that foreign-born U.S.-based terrorists are more likely to have been radicalized here before they act. So we will see what this investigation uncovers, but we should not be politicizing this. We need to be coming together as a country and showing the resilience that, frankly, New Yorkers are showing this morning.
What's the line between politicization and just calling it for what it is? You know, he believes, the president believes, and a big part of his party and a big part of our population believes that we have entry problems. And that's why we see these attacks from people who come from abroad, come here, and go bad on the rest of us.
Well, look, again, the focus of national security professionals, of counterterrorism professionals, is not on the politics, and it shouldn't be on the politics. We need to be focused on the facts. We need to be focused on the intelligence that helps us constantly improve our vetting and our efforts to stop these attacks. The problem here is, Chris, what yesterday's attack reflects is the morphing of the terror threat, the evolution from complex, externally directed attacks like we saw on 9/11 to the type of attack that this was yesterday, where you have an individual seemingly operating without others, although the investigation is ongoing, and taking upon himself to likely be inspired and have been inspired by ISIS messaging to act wherever they are. This is the first vehicle attack that we've seen in this country, jihadi-inspired vehicle attack. We've seen about 15 of those, though, across Europe and other places in the last several years. So this is the first time that this type of attack has come to the United States, and it really follows the ISIS playbook of inspiring people to act where they are.
Look, I hear you on the politics. I don't think it's a coincidence that the President of the United States didn't mention the ISIS affiliation to those who ambushed our soldiers in Niger and killed 4 of them, because it didn't play to advantage. But this does play to advantage, and that's why he's mentioning it. People are afraid here in the United States, and they're afraid specifically of Muslims. Not all Americans. You have a lot of people who are able to draw a distinction between a radicalized population that is bastardizing, perverting a faith, and an entire faith of over 1 billion people. But it's politically saleable, and the solution to this, Lisa, as you well know, is going to be found in politics. So what is the right direction to move in terms of fighting back against these types of attacks that we just saw right now?
Well, one of the directions is to work within communities and to not play in to ISIS messaging. ISIS recruits individuals and mobilizes them to violence based on a message that says we are in a clash of civilizations, that it's us against them, that there's a war of religion. And anytime we use messaging or play into that recruiting, we're doing their work for them, and we shouldn't be doing that. We need to be coming together and getting information from communities, having communities come together to help us stop these types of attacks, because more than likely, these types of attacks, these one-off individuals who are inspired to act, the information to stop those attacks is going to come from communities, from people who know these individuals and can work with law enforcement to stop it.
Extreme vetting, the travel ban expanding, is that a part of the answer in your opinion?
Again, we should always be looking for ways to strengthen our vetting. But the travel ban, which is a broad and wide, cuts across a wide swath of countries and is based on nationality and is not based on intelligence, is not the type of change that is going to help make us more safe. And the extreme vetting, again, we should always be improving our vetting, but it needs to be based on intelligence. We need to learn lessons from this, and if there is anything to change in the vetting, we should address that. But more likely than not, as we're seeing, the intelligence may reflect that this individual was radicalized here.
We hear from intel experts all the time that they don't look at who somebody else is. They look at what they are in terms of their dispositions. Lisa Monaco, appreciate your perspective. Thank you.
Thanks.
And a big part of this story is about perspective. We have a loss of life. We have to care about that. There's an interconnectedness among all of us. When people lose their life, it's an injury to all of us. And also, there's symbolism to here in New York. You know, E.B. White wrote about it in 1949 in an essay, Here's New York. It's just as true today. Show the tower. We are in the shadow of the World Trade Center, a place that stands as a symbol of resolve, but also such profound victimization. This is the deadliest terror attack in New York City since 9/11. That bears remembering. And in fact, we should never forget. We're going to take a break. When we come back, there is new information. Poppy Harlow, John Berman has it